after the presentation. We'll get to as many questions as possible. Today's Lunch and Learn does offer 1 hour AIA and APA continuing education credit. AIA members, please put your name and AIA member number in the chat before the presentation ends, and you'll receive attendance credit. APA members are to self-report within 24 hours to receive credit. Larry will put his email in the chat right now if you have any other credit questions. The Florida Trust for Historic Preservation is the statewide preservation nonprofit that helps people see, experience, and save Florida's history. We preserve and share the rich architectural, historical, and archaeological heritage of Florida. I'd now like to introduce you to today's presenter, share a little bit about them before we get started. Nigel Rudolph is the Public Archaeology Coordinator at the Central Regional Center of the Florida Public Archaeology Network, FPAN, in Gainesville. He received his BA in Cultural Anthropology in 1998 from the University of West Florida and a BFA in Fine Arts Ceramics from the University of Florida in 2002. After receiving a second bachelor's degree, Nigel was a full-time cultural resource management archaeologist for over a decade before joining FPAN in 2013. Mr. Rudolph received his master's in the Historic Preservation Program at the University of Florida, where he focused on cemetery preservation. He's a husband, father, professional ceramic artist, and an avid tattoo collector. And now for the presentation. Nigel?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me on this talk. I know everybody's probably all over the state, but up here where I am in Gainesville, it's a gorgeous, cool fall afternoon, the day before holiday, or the day before Halloween, which is my favorite holiday. And so I'm excited to be here to talk about one of my favorite things, and that's cemeteries. I'm glad that you all are here, and we will get started. I know we've been doing this whole Zoom thing for like 5 years now. I'm still not an expert. I don't know how that's possible, but it's true. And if you all do have questions, and I love answering questions, just go ahead and put them in the chat, and Julie will run through those as best she can at the end. Some scary animation first. Ah! See, everybody's muted, so I can't hear all the hysterical laughs. Everybody probably got terrified from that. Okay, the plan of action for today. Thank you for the introduction. I've been with FPAN since 2013, as Julie said, and I've created a lovely little niche for myself focused on historic cemetery documentation and restoration. I actually do complete restoration work in historic cemeteries, and I'll talk about that and show some examples of the stuff I've done at the end of the presentation. But basically what we're going to be focusing the bulk of the talk is going to be on is understanding, in layman's terms, understanding the statewide cemetery regulations and federal regulations and some local regulations. So the laws that both help protect historic cemeteries and some of the issues that create gaps in that protection. We'll talk about that at the end. I am a worker. I feel most comfortable in the field. I think that has to do with being as a field archaeologist, doing CRM archaeology for so long, nearly 12 years. And so I feel most comfortable using my hands and getting dirty. And so that's a big part of the work I do. And it helps me connect. It helps connect me to the history physically and to the material culture, and that really helps me understand and see the value in these objects and protecting them. We at FPAN, the Florida Public Archaeology Network, I'm assuming everybody's heard of FPAN, Florida Public Archaeology Network. It's a statewide nonprofit focused on archaeology education and public outreach. We created a workshop series called CRIPT. Very clever name, Cemetery Resource Protection Training. It's wonderful thing if you want to have a workshop. It's a full day affair with a classroom portion and then a um, a in-field portion where we teach folks how to do basic cemetery maintenance and things like that. So if you're interested, reach out to your local FPAN office and we'll get that figured out. But one of the things that we cover in our classroom portion is laws. So I've kind of pulled a lot from that presentation, and that'll help us. I just want to point out this picture. This shows my dedication, y'all. This picture on the left is of a torrential downpour when I was restoring some headstones in the historic Evergreen Cemetery here in Gainesville. And I sat there for probably 2 hours looking out the window. And that's the whole story. But I'm dedicated. Historic cemeteries are valuable cultural resources. They provide historical documentation, genealogical information, cultural practices of a community, community memory, recognition and respect, education and awareness, and community involvement. These cemeteries provide tangible evidence of, and I primarily, sorry to digress, I primarily work in historic African American cemeteries. So that's a lot of my information I'm going to be bringing to y'all is from my experience working in Black cemeteries. They provide tangible evidence of the African American experience, including the struggles and achievements of African American communities from slavery through Jim Crow era and into the modern civil rights era. Of course, if you're a genealogist, you might be on the talk call just for the benefits of genealogy. Cemeteries have a huge benefit to genealogy. They offer invaluable records for descendants seeking to trace their family histories. Tombstones and burial records are historic documents, and they can provide names, dates, and other personal information that might not be available anywhere else. And this is great for historically marginalized groups that don't have any paper documentation, largely. Another good thing about cemeteries and why they're valuable cultural resources is because of cultural practices. Cemeteries often reflect the cultural and spiritual practices of a community, including burial customs, gravestone art, epitaphs, and again, if you're familiar at all with African American cemeteries, these are often really unique and really wonderful pieces of material culture. And of course, most importantly, I think, is community memory. These sites serve as places of remembrance and respect for ancestors, fostering a sense of continuity and identity. So, one of the big questions is why regulate human remains? And typically, when we're in the crypt workshops, I see hands going up and letting people answer them, but we're not going to do that. So I will answer my own question. Why regulate human remains? Now, cemetery laws differ from state to state and often arise organically in response to situations in the community. Laws are ideas people collectively thought of and share and have teeth. But what's valuable or what's important about regulating human remains is it's moral and ethically responsible, respect for the dead, archaeological importance, prevention of abuse, and preservation of the past. You could see this image of a Centro Español cemetery in Tampa that was heavily vandalized. There's no trees around it. That was hit with a block or something like that. And so whatever information was lost in that destruction is gone, right? And so preserving that, protecting that is really of the utmost importance to me. All right, we're going to jump into the laws really quickly. The next few slides are going to be focused on few Florida statutes that are very relevant to the existence of historic cemeteries. There is way more involved in each one of these statutes, and I'm going to be pretty quick in covering them. These statutes, though limited, are not perfect, are well, excuse me, and we have local and state level protections as well. So we're going to start with Chapter 872. Now, this is really kind of the umbrella law that protects state law that protects all human burials. All human burials, whether it's Native American, whether they're historic cemeteries, are protected. It applies to marked and unmarked. It applies to prehistoric burials, like I said. And of course, the penalties in particular are pretty intense. Third degree felony, um, and a second degree misdemeanor for not reporting. So if you see someone vandalizing a cemetery, a historic cemetery, and you don't say anything, you can be charged with a second degree misdemeanor for that act. That's how big a deal protection of these sacred landscapes really is. Um, Now, the big idea of this statute, it makes disturbances of an unmarked burial explicitly illegal, but it does not apply to individuals acting under direction or authority of the Division of Historical Resources, cemeteries operating under Chapter 497. We'll talk about that. People otherwise authorized by law to carry out such actions. So there are, loopholes for people that are actually trying to do good and have to either move cemeteries or in some way disturb the burials for good. Florida's human burial law procedure. Okay, this may seem like a dumb thing to say, but if you find human remains, please call law enforcement, no matter what, whether you are on your property, whether you are on state land, call law enforcement. Let them. They will be the ones that gauge whether or not it's a matter for an anthropologist, or if it's a matter for law enforcement. And obviously, if it's 75, it's deemed 75 years or older, the state archaeologist will be involved. And if it's a designated or a marked burial ground, that is up to law enforcement. It's important to call law enforcement, local law enforcement. Others may become involved, but communicate clearly. Their first stop is to contact local law enforcement, and then they will be made any requirements that require additional notifications. All right, Chapter 267. The big idea is without permitting, it is unlawful to disturb any archaeological site, whether that's historic or prehistoric, on state lands. So this includes indigenous sites. The penalties, like I said previously, are up to a third degree felony, forfeiture of equipment, vehicles, restitution, tools, everything, anything you possibly could have used to, loot or invade these sacred landscapes can be taken by law enforcement, and you will not get them back, including cars. This has happened many, many times. Looting of prehistoric archaeological sites is still a major problem here in the state of Florida. And it's something that, as an FPAN archaeologist, we manage a lot. The picture on the right is from Gumroot Swamp. And then if you're familiar with Alachua County, that is a tick-infested, really not the most pleasant place in the world, but it's a beautiful green space, but it's been looted horrible. Up and down, the entire place is looted. It looks like a bombing range. And we recently went out there. We were called by FWC to document a looting action that was going on, and they caught the people red-handed in process, and they were medical students at UF that were trying to sell artifacts to pay for their medical education. So it's people of all walks of life that are doing this, and it's extremely harmful. And if you just look at it from the perspective of every one of those artifacts is a puzzle piece, you're removing puzzle pieces. You're getting a full picture of what that puzzle is impossible if all the parts are scattered and removed. That's the tenets of 267. Florida Statutes Chapter 267 addresses historical injustices primarily through Section 267.0625. Now, if you see on the slide there, it says these are the basics that 267 protects irreplaceable historical and archaeological resources. ensures future generations can learn about Florida's past, provides a legal framework for preservation efforts, balances development with historical preservation, creates educational opportunities about state history, and addresses historical injustices. And like, how do you say, how does that happen? Well, through 267.0625. Let me just read basically what 0625 does. It mandates Florida Statute Chapter 267 addresses historical injustices primarily through 267.0625, which mandates the removal of offensive and derogatory geographic place names that are racial, ethnic, or religious slurs. Recognize these names as barriers to tolerance and understanding. If you've ever looked at an old historical map, particularly of the coasts of Florida, you'll know exactly what that's talking about. The chapter also establishes programs to preserve and promote the history and contributions of Florida's Black and African American residents through museum partnerships, education initiatives, and related specifically to our topic, use of 267.0625 helped create the historic cemeteries program that is now in at DHR, which is specifically focused on identifying, recording, and restoring abandoned African American cemeteries. So there's real teeth to a lot of these things, and they have a huge benefit to the community way beyond what's sort of on the surface. They go deep, and they can be really, really helpful. This is something that I would love if there's any descendants that are in the talk, observing me ramble on. This is really important to you. If you are descendants of people that are buried in a historic cemetery that is on private land, Chapter 70408 is what will empower you, what will protect you and help you gain access to that cemetery. Private landowners by law have to make at reasonable times in a reasonable manner grant you access to that property to restore, clean, talk with your ancestors. That's something that is written into Florida law. The owner of the land may designate the easement if the cemetery is abandoned or otherwise not being maintained. Such relatives and descendants may request the owner to provide for reasonable maintenance of the cemetery. And if the owner refuses or fails to maintain the cemetery, the relatives and descendants shall have the right to maintain the cemetery. So, one of the sort of loopholes to this cemetery, to this law, is reasonable times in a reasonable manner. Now, according to the property owner, that reasonable time can be the third Thursday of June during a leap year, something ridiculous, and that could be the only time he's granting access to descendants to come in there and care for their ancestors. If you're in a situation like this, I really highly recommend you could reach out to FPAN, but certainly reach out to law enforcement again, or to the Division of Historical Resources, and they can really help guide you in the direction that you need to go, because you are protected under 704 to have access to your ancestors' final resting grounds. Abandoned cemeteries. Okay. Now we're getting to the nitty gritty here. Chapter 497.284 permits local governments to help. It allows county or municipalities to provide, maintain, and secure for cemetery that has been abandoned. Now, don't look at the screen. Don't look at the screen. But if anybody, if anybody can guess how long in the state of Florida before a cemetery is considered abandoned. I've asked that question without showing the answer many times, and people are like, 5 years, 2 years, 3 years. It's 6 months. A cemetery can be considered abandoned in 6 months. So this is something that's having this protection is very, very important. Understanding this law, if you're working with a historic cemetery, is really important. But this law can empower local governments to care for these cemeteries, offering specific permissions. In Florida, a cemetery can become technically abandoned within 6 months of lack of maintenance. And that means if you don't mow the lawn of a historic cemetery that's not being used anymore, it could be considered abandoned very, very quickly. And so this leads to a lot of problems. It can lead to people acquiring that land. It could lead to the municipality taking over that property and doing with it as they please. And so there's lots of bad things that could come from an abandoned cemetery. But again, there are lots of grants specifically in the state of Florida through DHR specifically for um, abandoned cemeteries. So that's also really important to understand. Woo, I'm going to drink some water. Everybody excited for Halloween? Am I the only person? My 8-year-old is thrilled. She's going to be a werewolf for the third year in a row. The werewolf pants are getting a little short. So it's going to be a fun night. If anybody's in the Gainesville area, Alachua County area, I am leading a historical bicycle tour tonight, Halloween themed to the Evergreen Historical Cemetery here in Gainesville. So if you would like to get involved with that, holler at me. All right, the Florida Master Site File. I'm sure every single person on this call is aware of what the Florida Master Site File. If you are not, of what it is, if you are not, it is a huge list, essentially an inventory of historical and cultural resources. It covers archaeological sites, so pre-colonial, pre-contact archaeological sites, indigenous sites, historic structures, historic cemeteries, historic bridges, shipwrecks, historic districts, all of that stuff. And there's several forms that you can fill out that are specific to those topics that you are looking to record, those specific sites that you're looking to record. There are 6 categories, as you see here. Listing a historical cemetery on the Florida Master Site File officially documents its existence as a historical or cultural resource within the state. This documentation allows for its identification and consideration during development projects. Remember what I just said, okay? This documentation allows for its identification and consideration during development projects. This record helps to ensure that significant historical sites are not inadvertently disturbed or destroyed. Listing a cemetery or any archaeological site or any historic building is really the first step into preservation. It's the first thing that is really vital to protecting that landscape. It gets a dot on the map in Tallahassee. So Tallahassee knows, all right, this place exists. Hopefully that'll come into play if anybody decides to develop in or around the space. They will recognize that there is a site that has been documented here. That doesn't always happen, and that is the gaps that we're going to be talking about. More than 300,000 cultural and historical sites are recorded on the Florida Master Site File, but only about 2,500 are cemeteries. Cemeteries are among the most underrecorded historical resource in Florida. I think conservative estimates indicate there are about 5,000 to 7,000 historic cemeteries in the state of Florida and could be potentially at risk. There's only 2,500 that are listed on the Florida Master Site File. So 5,000 to 7,000 that are out there, 2,500 that are listed. So that means there's tons. There's several right around you, right around your community. And you can get those on the site file, and it's way easier than it used to be. If you're familiar at all with the site file, it used to be, it still is a lengthy paperwork process initial or at the end, but initially it's been kind of zoomed in and made much more easier for the general public to get involved and participate. That's because of the Florida Historic Cemetery Inventory. This was a program that we at FPAN helped create. It's a project of the DHR, the Bureau of Historic Preservation, and FPAN. The Historic Cemetery Inventory gives anyone with the knowledge of the historic cemetery the opportunity to take part in preserving them. With potentially more than 2,000 historic cemeteries in the state not yet recorded, we need your help to find and record them. See that little QR code on the screen? If you hold up your fancy little smartphone to it, that'll take you to the Florida Historic Cemetery Inventory. It's just a postcard. You can fill it out online. We have the actual postcards, and all you need is a general location information, some other information. It's very basic, and that will help. That will instantaneously go to DHR. They will see if it's already recorded, and if it is not recorded on the Florida Master Site file, it will get a number automatically. And then, so that's the dot. The number is the dot. And then later on, you can proceed with doing the full Florida Master Site file documentation form. And if you've ever seen that, and you are not an archaeologist or somebody with really good eyes, you might need help. And FPAN, we are here to help with that. I've done hundreds, probably, maybe not that much. That's a little braggy. A lot. I've done a lot of these forms. And so we're happy to help. We're happy to create the maps for you. We're happy to lead you in the general direction. If you want your name signed on the bottom, here at FPAN, we're here to assist. And we would be happy to do that. But it's really important to get that dot on the map to begin with. All right, so we just talked about all those laws, and I blew through them way faster than I should have. So I'm going to go back and do it all again real quick here. Bear with me. I'm just joking. Um, we talked about all the good that these laws can do, but where is the issues? What are the issues? How does it hurt? What could go wrong? The dreaded gap in Florida cemetery preservation, more spooky animation. The gaps in enforcement funding and specific guidance. There are gaps in enforcement funding. Specific guidance for local governments and private landowners have historically weakened the preservation efforts. So these gaps that I'm going to go into, this is one of the things that we really have to figure out how to work around. And there's a way that I'll touch on after this on how to do that. But basically, number one is no mandatory action required. Unless the cemetery is on state land, unless it's on state land at all, the archaeological site, it is not mandatory for the developer or whomever is going to be utilizing the land to look at the Florida Master Site file to see if there's a site on there. Chapter 497.284 says counties, cities may maintain abandoned cemeteries, not must maintain abandoned cemeteries. There's no legal obligation for local governments to actually step in, even when a cemetery has been abandoned. They could just continue to stare at it and hope that someone else comes in and handles the problem. The dreaded 6-month wait loophole. The statute requires 6 months of abandonment before action can be taken. Okay, so you could sit there and watch a cemetery fall into disrepair for 6 months after the 6 months where it could become abandoned. So a year basically into the process. A cemetery can deteriorate significantly in 6 months, especially in Florida's climate, especially in a lot of the rural African American cemeteries that are often in heavily wooded areas. The worst thing for a historic cemetery, like bar none, are trees around it and damage that can happen. There is no mechanism for emergency intervention when rapid deterioration threatens the cemetery. So that is a big problem. Small exempt cemeteries fall through the cracks. The problem, many small cemeteries are exempt from 497 regulations entirely, including church cemeteries under 5 acres, family plots, community nonprofit cemeteries that don't sell burial spaces. The gap. These small cemeteries aren't subject to the same oversight, yet they're often the most vulnerable and abandoned. Vulnerable to abandonment because there's not a lot of eyes on them. One thing that I've learned in the years that I've been doing this work is getting eyes on these landscapes is really the most important thing. Then you get the dot on the map, but recognizing that the place exists on the ground and telling your neighbors and telling the community that exists, because there's always somebody that remembers. Talk to them, talk to your neighbors. We're so scared of talking to each other now because we don't know what to expect. But talk to people and learn about your community, and that will help preserve these sacred landscapes. No funding mechanism. The problem, while 497.284 allows local governments to sue owners for reimbursement, it provides no upfront funding. The gap, counties must front all costs and hope to recover the money later through litigation. And a lot of counties aren't willing to do that. They're just not willing to do that. And they probably don't have anything in their budget that would allow them to do that. So they're not going to take that step, and so the cemetery will just continue to fall into disrepair, and eventually, what's out of sight becomes out of mind. And I've seen it happen. I promise you, cemeteries can become completely lost off the landscape. They're not visually seen, and they're gone. They're gone from the majority of the community's memory. But there are folks that remember it. They just don't have the ability to get their voices out there. So that's your job, my job, our job to help that situation. No discovery or registry requirement. The problem, there's no requirement to identify, map, or register abandoned cemeteries. The gap, thousands of cemeteries remain undocumented throughout the state. Now, this could have a real impact because developers may unknowingly disturb unmarked graves. Because if it is not on state land or requiring state permits, work that goes on the cemetery they have no obligation to check the Florida Master Site File. State does, but local ordinances do not require that, as I covered. So I've seen this happen. There's a project I'm working on outside of Mount Dora that this is the case. The developer who's going to bring a road within like 10, 20 feet of a historic cemetery had no obligation to get a ground penetrating radar done or anything like that to check if the cemetery went on beyond the visual boundaries, because particularly in African American cemeteries, what is the visual boundary of a cemetery is not the actual boundary of the cemetery. They expand well beyond often, and I will talk more about that on some personal experience. And finally, weak enforcement against negligent owners. The problem, while counties can sue for reimbursement, that's it. There is no penalties or license revocations for cemetery owners who simply walk away. The gap, no real consequences deter bad actors from abandoning cemeteries. There's no mandatory insurance, bonding requirements for small cemetery operators. So there's a lot of serious gaps. Now, there's one way that a lot of this can be fixed on the local level, and that is through a CLG, a certified local government. If you're not familiar, I guarantee you 100% there are people on this call that know way more about CLGs than I do. So I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert in CLGs. You can see in the image on the left, I was supposed to give this talk at the Palms conference earlier in the year, and so I marked Fernandina Beach is a CLG. City of Gainesville is a CLG. Certified Local Government Program was enacted as part of the National Historic Preservation Act amendments of 1980. The program links three levels of government, federal, state, and local, into a preservation partnership for the identification, evaluation, and protection of historic properties. Designation as a certified local government, either as a municipality or a county, makes historic preservation a public policy through the passage of historic preservation ordinance. So this is when that gap is filled, okay? Those gaps that I just discussed that come with those laws that were designed to help, this can fill that gap. It makes it a requirement on the local level to check if a cemetery is present or a historical resource is present. If you are a CLG, if you are not, if your community is a CLG, if you are not, it doesn't have to happen. The designation as a certified local government, either as a municipality or a county, makes historic preservation a public policy through the passage of historic preservation ordinance. The ordinance establishes a historic preservation board to develop and oversee the functions of its historic preservation program. And those historic preservation boards under a CLG are quasi-judicial, and so they do have teeth, and they could put penalties on individuals that violate it. They can set strict requirements. And so that is all comes with the formation of a CLG. There are only 86 CLGs in the state of Florida, and I promise you there are way more, way more counties, and I don't know how many counties there are in the state of Florida, but certainly more cities, obviously. So this is an important thing. This is something that historians and community advisors and the DHR can help you organize if this is something you want to get going for your community. So I highly recommend looking into that. Okay, so typically, I would say, are there any questions about this? But if you're asking questions, please do. But right now, I'm going to move past this boring stuff. Important stuff, don't get me wrong, important, but not exactly as exciting as the next slides, guys. This is going to blow your mind. No, I'm going to talk about some of my personal experiences in cemetery preservation, some of the places I've worked at, and some of the communities that I've had the privilege of working in. I see this work as my obligation as a public servant. FPAN is a tax-funded organization. It is my obligation to give back to the communities that pay my paycheck. And I think it's really, really valuable thing that we do. And again, I've created this little niche for cemetery preservation for myself. And I think this is my calling in life. I'm not sure. Raising a good kid, protecting cemeteries. One day I'll be able to ride a wheelie on my bike. One day. I turn 50 next month, so I think we're going downhill. All right. First up, the BMEC, the Bethlehem Methodist Episcopal Cemetery. This is an amazing cemetery that I've been working at for 6 years in Archer, Florida, which is about, 30 minutes southwest of Gainesville, straight down what is Archer Road. If you take Archer Road, one of the main thoroughfares going east-west to Gainesville, it goes straight into the city of Archer. And Archer was connected to the railroad line that ran from Cedar Key to Fernandina Beach by Yulee. Yulee's railroad ran through there, basically essentially created Archer. The bulk of the people that are buried in the cemetery are the aunts or the descendants, or forgive me, the bulk of the people that are buried in the cemetery, their ancestors, who some of which are also buried in the cemetery, were formerly enslaved on plantations in the area. There are connections to the Rosewood Massacre in the cemetery, and so it's a really important cultural resource. And I had the privilege of essentially restoring all the headstones within that sacred landscape. It was established in the mid-19th century. It's a fully descendant run board of directors, and some other really caring community members. Restoration essentially began in 1999, FPAN involvement in 2018. The woman in the upper right, Miss Clyde Williams, she's the one who started the BEMCRO. This is a mouthful. Are you ready? The Bethlehem Methodist Episcopal Cemetery Restoration Organization. She started it in '99. She was elderly, infirmed, could no longer do the physical work that was required for somebody that's doing this kind of work. So she hollered at her sister, who was living in Atlanta at the time, or Washington, D.C., forgive me, Roberta Lopez, former mayor of Archer, city council member, phenomenal force to be reckoned with, phenomenal human being. That's who I initially got with when I was starting this work. The headstone on the left is Ellen Lawrence. That's not the oldest headstone, but it is the oldest individual that is buried there. The epitaph is to the memory of Ellen Lawrence, died May 19th, 1884, aged 88 years. So if you're good at math, that means she was born in 1796, and that is a long time ago. And so the just this one artifact, in my opinion, makes the whole everything all important. Like this is why I'm doing this work to protect this resource. In 2020, the University of Florida received a grant from DHR to do a full comprehensive management plan for the cemetery. It was really fantastic. FPAN did a very small GPR survey of the cemetery, about 20% of the cemetery. We found 65 unmarked burials. This coming Monday, we are actually starting a full GPR of the entire cemetery. We're going to be out there all week long, all day long. If anybody in the area wants to come out and watch us push something that looks like a lawnmower silently across grass. It's very exciting, thrilling process. But if you're interested in doing that, we will be out there. This is the before and after of Ellen Lawrence's grave. The image on the left is the before, then there's an after. A former FPAN employee named Emma Dietrich. She's now up in Virginia doing cemeteries with the state. She did photogrammetry on all the restored headstones that I did, and it was really cool. So we now have 3D images of all of them, and you can spin them around. I know photogrammetry is kind of old tech actually by now, but it's still really awesome. And beyond my pay grade, that's all I know. This is a really amazing one. Formerly enslaved individual, Albert Long, born into slavery in 1835. I couldn't find, you can see the image on the left, the before, the top part of the headstone was missing for many, many, many years, many decades. I was able to locate it. You can see the dramatically different coloring of the stone because the top half was, I bet I could do this. The top half was buried underground, so it's stained. And the bottom half, of course, was above ground, so it was sun bleached. This has all been cleaned with D2 biological solution. So this was an amazing opportunity to work on this artifact for this cemetery. This gentleman was enslaved at the Yulees. David Levy Yulee had a plantation called Cottonwood, which was essentially the labor for the formation of the city of Archer. It was just about a half mile to the north of the cemetery now, and a lot of formerly enslaved people are buried there, buried in the cemetery that were enslaved at David Levy Yulee's plantation. He wasn't a good guy. Just between you One thing that really became clear in the work that I've been doing over the years is the importance of the associated grave goods. And this is something that we teach in our crypt workshops. These things that have been set around these historic markers are just as important to the community, to the descendants, as the headstones themselves. The shells in particular speak to a wide variety of possible reasons why people use shells. I think the fact that they often represent in African American cemeteries that the sea trip across the Atlantic from Africa to the quote unquote New World. That's what the shells often recommend or represent. In this case, it's very interesting. The person was born in Cedar Key, known as Cedar Keys back then. So I bet you that the clamshells, that these are quahog clamshells, they were everywhere. These are just ones I found. Like there was like two on the grave. You could sort of see them in this picture on the left. And then as I was looking around, I found dozens and dozens and dozens. But they were probably connected to the clamming industry out on Cedar Key, which is still very much a thing. Barely hanging on, but it's still a thing. And so protecting these artifacts is just as valuable as protecting the rest of the material culture there. So that's one thing that's really become clear through the work I've been doing in historic cemeteries. All right, I'm going to jump to another cemetery in Archers, just north of the BMEC. It's St. Peter Cemetery. Again, it's a descendant-run board called the St. Peter St. Paul Community Council. Really great folks. I was very lucky to be involved with them as well. How I got involved was adjacent to this cemetery called St. Peter. Around it, the perimeter around it, there was a big energy consortium that was going to put in solar power field, and it wasn't going to be like a couple of solar power panels. It was going to be thousands and thousands and thousands. It was going to be a major industrial thing. And they were almost given the green light, but the community stood up. They formed this organization, the St. Peter and St. Paul Community Council, to push back and say that this is a neighborhood, this is a village. They considered it to just be rural land and that there was nobody living out there, but people have been living out there for 200 years. And so extremely important. They managed to stop the development of this, and I was lucky to help to participate in that. And it seems kind of controversial for an archaeologist to say, but it's really all about context. There's often way more to the story than meets the eye, and it's those intricacies that you see in those deep cultural significance of these sites. Really quickly, going back to the Florida Master Site File, one thing that I noticed with St. Peter and several other cemeteries here in Alachua County is that they were marked on the Florida Master Site File as being white, not African American, being white. St. Peter Cemetery is 100% fully African American. I think they said that there might be a couple of Hispanic folks that are buried in there, but it is not white. And so that seems rather insignificant to folks unless you look deeply, that it's literally the rewriting of a community's history. And it's extremely vital. This is a government document. The Florida Master Site File is a government document. It is official. And so it's really important to have that reflect the community accurately and reflect who is buried in the cemetery. I went back and provided an update to it, made it as African American. Then, and I'll like to talk to Julie about this. Then the developer resubmitted another update and designated it as white again. And so there's this back and forth crazy thing that can happen. But that's what the Florida Master Site File is. It's an inventory of all these documents. It's there. It's official. The old Groveland Cemetery in Groveland was the topic of my master's thesis. It is an abandoned cemetery related to the Groveland Four racial violence from 1949. This is the most important thing I've done in my life. I first got interested in this by after reading Devil in the Grove by Gilbert King. This was an absolutely beautiful opportunity for me to connect with the community and help restore this really important and lost almost lost cultural resource. Very quickly after the violence in 1949, the cemetery was abandoned after the entire Black community was essentially burned out and removed from the city of Gainesville. And it sat for 70 years. And it was the most disturbed, most vegetation overgrown, and I'll show you in the next slide. Most intensely vegetative, really overgrown site I've ever been to. It was the worst conditioned cemetery I have ever been to, and it was my pleasure to help in the process of restoring it. Here's some headstones. Macy, this is the youngest person, the oldest headstone that we recovered. It was broken into three pieces, including the base. This is made out of concrete. It doesn't just blow away in a stiff wind. These were broken and thrown. I found the pieces in three different parts of the cemetery. This one, the bottom left, is a marble tablet that was smashed with a sledgehammer. So there are real impacts to Florida's sort of dynamic history in these cultural landscapes, and it's really shocking when you see it visually in the material culture. Very quickly, these are some aerials from 1941, 1947, 1958, and 1974. We hired Rebecca O'Sullivan with Stantec to come and do ground penetrating radar out at the cemetery to document unmarked burials. And all those red rectangles, those are the unmarked burials. And if you look at the GPR results sort of superimposed over the 1974 aerial, they were putting in citrus trees right where there were headstones. It was a complete disregard for the cemetery as an entity. And they were literally putting in citrus trees where they knew they were burials. So that kind of just shows the sort of marginalization of these landscapes when they're affiliated with particular groups. I'm going to burn through a couple of slides and I want to answer questions. This is sort of the process of the restoration. And that's what it looks like now. It's a park. It's open to the public. The city of Groveland has taken it over, and it is a municipal cemetery. And there's obviously no longer burials being made in it. But each one of those white rectangles that you see are unknown burial markers that I placed multiple times because they kept being in the wrong place of the unmarked graves. So each one says unknown, and so it's just really a beautiful place to go. And I highly recommend it. Currently in the works, I'm restoring a big percentage of the historic yard, the old yard as it's called, at the historic Evergreen Cemetery in Gainesville. Any given Saturday or Sunday, I'm out there working, rain or shine, apparently. So if you're in the area, come out and say hi. I would love to talk to you about this in person. And that really wraps it up. Thank you for listening to me rambling.
Not rambling. That was wonderful, Nigel. Thanks so much for the presentation.
My
The
pleasure.
laws are important. The preservation work, the hands-on work you're doing is important. The community work is important, and I think that cemeteries are something that people sometimes can easily connect with, a little bit more easily than some of the other resources that we
Yeah,
try to
absolutely.
protect. We've got great questions in the chat, so we're going to go ahead and move on into that. We've got about 6 minutes before 12:30, and a
Oh, I
couple of
talked a long time.
interesting comments as well. So, Lonnie Mann comments that legislators are concerned about eminent domain related to abandoned cemeteries, and it's come up in debate. I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that and 497 and that kind of
Uh,
thing.
I don't. I'm not. I can't answer that question. I'm sorry. I'm not sure on how to answer it about eminent domain. I have no doubt that that is an issue. Um,
Sounds like
That's what these
it's
laws are for, is to prevent that kind of situation from happening. And municipalities have to abide by them as well, theoretically. Julie, do you have something to add? You have far more experience in the legal side of these things than I do.
no, I think it was codified in 497, maybe in the like around 2008. But I would have to ask Lonnie about it, and we'll do that offline later and follow up. But thanks, Lonnie. It sounds like we need to keep it on our radar. I'm not going to go in order, but make sure we hit some of the ones that are more questions. There's a local, small, maybe three burial cemetery with little information on it, what's the best way to find out more about it and ensure its protection?
Oh, that's a good question. I'd say first things first, put a Florida master site file, the postcard, get that in there so there's a dot on the map. Even if it's a tiny, tiny cemetery in someone's yard, we'll let Tallahassee know that it exists. And then talk to the people, talk to the closest house if that's what you're willing to do. Walk and knock on their door. Look at property appraisers' websites. There are ways that you can start that will open the door to more information. Find a Grave is a really great resource. It might be on there, but start at the more obvious things like property appraisers' websites. Look up names. Find a Grave has a name search process. So you could actually look at a name on a headstone and then research that, and that might prompt more work. And it is associated with ancestry.com, so then you can get a whole genealogy thing going. So there are really good avenues. If it's an African American cemetery, that's going to be often much more complex because tangible records are much more difficult to find. But they're out there if they haven't been burned or something like that.
Related question, will you repeat again the numerical definition of small cemetery?
Oh, did I say that? Let me go back. I'm not sure.
I'm not sure if there's not a definition,
Yeah,
then
I don't think there is. I don't think there's a numerical number. I mean, I would say, I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't think I have
yeah.
a specific number. Is there a specific number that you're aware of, Ju?
I am not aware of a threshold
Yeah, yeah,
for
yeah. I
official
mean,
capacity.
three, I would say three is pretty small.
Um, we can also come off of mute if people would like to ask questions. It looks like maybe Maggie, did you want to ask a question? Okay, you're just turning your video on.
I have to say that
Shelby,
Maggie was laughing at all my jokes. I was watching Maggie's screen, and so that makes right here, Maggie, right here, makes me feel good.
front row student. Shelby Bender comments that she has email conversations with folks in Bethlehem and also Laurel Hill near Archer out of her neighborhood, but so glad that you, Nigel, picked up on both of them and have given them the needed assistance. So thank you so much for that.
It's been my
Um,
pleasure, literally.
and then Lonnie Mann asks if you know how the 7,000 estimate of cemeteries was made.
I don't. I throw that number out there all the time, and I'm not sure. I'm assuming it was based on historical documentation of some sort, but I honestly don't know. That's a really great question. Um, yeah,
I
I'm not sure.
wonder, could it possibly be the number recorded in the site file? Or is
No,
that the
there's
broader
7,000
number?
suspected. There's 7,000
Oh,
historic
suspected.
cemeteries within the state of Florida. There's only 2,500
Oh,
on
wow.
the site file. So I don't historic documents, maybe property appraisers throughout the state. Um, that's a really good question, Lonnie. Thank you for that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Shelby comments she's listed a few cemeteries on the Florida Master site file. It's not hard, not complicated, and she's checking another one out now. And just wanted to note that Nigel mentioned he's available to help with that, and FPN can help anybody record a cemetery. Is that right?
Absolutely. I'm here to help. Not today though. It's Halloween today, so maybe Monday.
Um, another question about the site file is the list online, or do you need to email and inquire? And maybe you could talk a little bit about cemetery and public information versus site file and private information?
So that's a great question. The site file is not open to not the sunshine laws in the state of Florida do not apply with the Florida Master Site File. And that is because of prehistoric archaeological sites, pretty much exclusively. Now, information that are not related to location information of prehistoric sites that can be accessed. And you just reach out to the Florida Master Site File. They're great folks. They will be more than happy to assist you, and they will provide you with that. But it's not something you can just go to online without special permission. FPAN has the ability to get access to the site file. So if you have specific questions about a site, send me an email and I will verify whether it's on the site file or not. And that's in the entire state, all counties.
Great, thanks, Nigel. Lonnie helps us conclude by saying, Nigel, you're doing great work. I love your passion. We need you in every community in Florida, and I would echo that. Your energy about
Thank you.
cemeteries and the work that you've done, and the work that a lot of preservationists have done in Florida is outstanding. So
Thank you, Larry, for sharing my email.
that concludes our lunch and learn for today. Thank you so much, Nigel. If you or your company is interested in sponsoring a future lunch and learn, please email Laura Glenn, and her contact information will be in the chat. If you're not already a member of the Florida Trust, consider joining today. You can access free webinars and many other great benefits, like our newly relaunched Preservation Passport program, which a link will be in the chat for. We hope you can join us for next month's Lunch and Learn, Indigenous Tribal Perspectives on Preservation. If you haven't registered yet, the link will be in the chat. All registrants for today's Lunch and Learn will receive an email in the coming days with a link to the video, the presentation material, and additional handouts. And just post your information in the chat if you would like AIA credits. Thank you, and goodbye. Have a great day.
Bye.